boy! Please, it's not safe!
The German Shepherd stood on the terrifyingly thin ice, a fresh bloodstain spreading across his neck bandage. Officer Hudson begged him to come back, but the wounded dog refused. Rocky stared into the abyss beneath his paws because he saw what no human could. Trapped under the river's surface, pressed desperate and pale against the ice, was the hand of his missing daughter. Grab your coffee and stay with me, because this rescue hid a dark secret. Please like the video and comment. I'm watching to see what happens next. The night had turned violent long before the snow started falling. It was a Tuesday that felt like any other shift until the radio crackled with a call that changed everything for Officer Jack Hudson and his partner, Rocky. The heater in the patrol car was blasting hot air against the windshield, fighting a losing battle against the brutal winter storm that was hammering the small town of Oak Creek. Jack gripped the steering wheel with hands that were shaking not from the cold, but from the adrenaline that was slowly leaving his body and being replaced by a sick, heavy dread. He looked into the rearview mirror, his eyes stinging with exhaustion, to check on the back seat. Behind the wire mesh that separated the front of the car from the back, Rocky was lying down, which was something the high-energy dog never did while on duty. The large, dark-sable German Shepherd let out a low, shaky breath that fogged up the glass. Around Rocky's neck, a thick layer of white gauze was wrapped tight, but even in the dim green light of the dashboard, Jack could see the dark, wet spot that was ruining the clean bandage. It was blood, bright, angry, red blood. It had happened so fast that Jack still couldn't process it. Just 2 hours ago, they had stopped a stolen sedan on the edge of town, and the driver had bailed out, running into a dark alleyway. Jack had chased him on foot, cornering the guy near a dumpster, but the man had spun around with something silver flashing in his hand. Jack hadn't seen the knife until it was almost in his chest. He had raised his arm, bracing for the stab, closing his eyes for the impact that never came. Instead, a blur of fur and muscle had flown past him. Rocky had hit the attacker with the force of a freight train, taking the blade right to the neck to save his handler. Hello, my amazing friends and family. Welcome back to Vigilant Heart Tales. Before we jump deep into today's story, make sure you hit that subscribe button and tell me in the comments where you're watching from. I love seeing all your names and countries. And don't forget to check out the other stories on the channel. Tomorrow I've got another crazy one coming that I know you'll enjoy. All right, let's get into it. The vet, Dr. Evans, had been grim as he stitched the dog up. He told Jack that Rocky was lucky to be alive because the blade had missed the main artery by less than an inch. The doctor's orders were strict and clear. Take him home, keep him warm, and do not let him move, because if that wound opened up again, the dog could bleed out in minutes. Jack wiped a hand down his face, feeling the rough stubble on his chin. You're a good boy, Rocky, he whispered to the rearview mirror, his voice cracking. We are almost home, buddy. You just hold on for me. The snow was falling harder now, turning the highway into a white tunnel where the road and the sky looked exactly the same. Jack drove slower than usual, terrified that a sudden stop might hurt his partner. He thought about his wife, who had passed away 3 years ago, leaving him to raise their 10-year-old daughter, Victoria, all by himself. Victoria and Rocky were the only two things in the world that mattered to him. Victoria was small for her age, with messy brown hair and a smile that could light up the darkest room. She loved Rocky more than she loved most people, and the dog looked at her like she was the most important thing on the planet. Every night, Rocky would sleep at the foot of her bed, guarding her from bad dreams. Jack smiled a little just thinking about them reunited. He needed to get home to her. He needed to hug her and tell her that everything was okay, even though he felt like he was falling apart inside. He turned the cruiser onto a street, the tires crunching loudly on the fresh snow. The plow trucks hadn't been out this far yet, so the car fishtailed slightly, sliding on hidden ice. But Jack corrected it with the ease of someone who had driven these roads his whole life. He pulled into the driveway and killed the engine. The silence that followed was heavy. The house looked dark, which was strange. It was only 6 in the evening, so Victoria should have been up. The lights in the living room should have been on. casting a warm yellow glow onto the snow. The TV should have been glowing blue through the curtains as she watched her cartoons. However, the windows were black squares staring back at him like empty eyes. Maybe the power went out, Jack muttered to himself, trying to push down the rising panic in his chest. The storm was bad enough to take down lines, after all. He jumped out of the car, the wind hitting his face like a physical slap. He ran to the back door of the cruiser and opened it gently. "Easy, buddy. Easy," Jack said softly. Rocky groaned as he stood up. The dog wobbled, his legs unsteady from the painkillers the vet had given him. Jack reached in and helped the heavy dog down onto the snowy driveway. Rocky landed with a heavy step, swaying on his paws. The bandage on his neck was stark white against the dark night, except for that growing red spot that terrified Jack. "Let's get you inside," Jack said, guiding the dog toward the front porch. They walked up the steps together, man and dog, leaning on each other. Jack reached into his pocket for his keys to unlock the front door, but he froze. He didn't need his keys. The front door wasn't locked. It wasn't even latched. It was standing open about 2 inches, swinging slightly in the freezing draft. Snow had blown into the hallway, creating a small, white drift on the hardwood floor. Jack's stomach dropped. It felt like he had swallowed a stone. "Victoria," he called out. He pushed the door open and stepped inside. The house was freezing. It was almost as cold inside as it was outside, which meant the heat had been escaping for a while. "Victoria, Daddy's home." Silence. Jack didn't bother taking off his boots, tracking snow and mud onto the carpet. He ran into the living room, but it was empty. He ran to the kitchen, but it was empty too. A half-eaten bowl of cereal sat on the table, the milk warm and spoiling, suggesting she had been interrupted in the middle of a snack. Panic started to claw at his throat, making it hard to breathe. He ran up the stairs, taking them 2 at a time, calling her name over and over again. "Victoria, answer me." He burst into her bedroom. Her bed was unmade, messy from this morning. Her toys were scattered on the rug, but she wasn't there. He checked the bathroom, the guest room, the basement. Nothing. He ran back to the front door, his heart hammering against his ribs like a trapped bird. He stood in the open doorway, staring out at the storm. The snow was coming down so fast now that he couldn't even see the house across the street. "Victoria," he screamed into the wind. Rocky was standing on the porch. The dog wasn't lying down like he was supposed to. He was standing stiff, his nose twitching, sniffing the violent air. "Jack, is that you?" A voice came from the driveway. Jack spun around, his hand instinctively going to his holster before he stopped himself. It was his neighbor, Mr. Henderson. Henderson was a big man, heavy-set, with a thick beard and a smile that always lasted a little too long. He lived 3 houses down and was always around, always watching. He was the kind of guy who knew everyone's schedule and always wanted to chat when you were in a hurry. Henderson was standing in the snow, wearing a heavy parka and holding a snow shovel. "Jack, I saw the cruiser pull up," Henderson shouted over the wind. "Everything okay?" The door was open. Jack ran down the steps, ignoring the ice that made him slip. "Have you seen Victoria?" "She is not in the house." The door was open. Henderson frowned, leaning on his shovel like a cane. He looked concerned. "Victoria? No. Well, wait. I saw her earlier. Maybe around 4? She was playing in the front yard, building a snowman. 4 o'clock. Jack looked at his watch. It was past 6 now. She knows better than to stay out this late. Where did she go? Henderson shrugged, his eyes hidden by the shadow of his hood. I thought she went inside. But, you know kids, maybe she wandered off? I saw some tracks heading toward the woods earlier, but the wind covered them up pretty quick. The woods. The woods behind Jack's house stretched for miles. Dense pine, rocky hills, and deep ravines. And beyond that lay the river. She wouldn't go to the woods, Jack said, shaking his head. She's scared of the dark. Maybe she saw something, Henderson suggested. He took a step closer. You want any help you look? I got a big flashlight in my truck. At that moment, a low, menacing sound rumbled through the air. It wasn't the wind. It was Rocky. The wounded dog had limped down the stairs. He was standing between Jack and Mr. Henderson. His hackles, the fur along his spine, were standing straight up. His lips were curled back, revealing white teeth. A deep, guttural growl vibrated from his chest. Whoa! Henderson took a step back, holding his shovel up like a shield. Easy there, killer. I'm just trying to help. Jack was shocked. Rocky was a trained police dog. He wasn't aggressive without a command. And he knew Henderson. He had seen the man dozens of times over the years. Rocky Hill. Jack snapped. Rocky didn't look at Jack. He kept his golden eyes locked on Henderson. The growl got louder, turning into a snarl. He's hurt, Jack said quickly, grabbing Rocky's collar. He's confused. He took a bad hit tonight. He's on meds. Yeah, he looks rough, Henderson said, eyeing the bloody bandage. Maybe you should put him inside. He looks like he's about to snap. Jack pulled on the collar. Rocky inside. Now, for the first time in his life, Rocky resisted. He planted his feet. He lunged slightly toward Henderson, snapping his jaws. Rocky, Jack yelled. He dragged the dog backward up the steps and into the house. He shoved Rocky into the hallway and slammed the door. Sorry about that, Jack yelled to Henderson. I'm going to check the backyard. If you see her, I'll check the street, Henderson said, nodding. He turned and walked away into the swirling white. Jack didn't wait. He ran to the backyard. Victoria, Pumpkin, please. He shined his flashlight across the yard. The snow was undisturbed, smooth, perfect. Wait, if she had been playing in the front yard, like Henderson said, where was the snowman? Jack ran back to the front. He swept the beam of light across the lawn. It was flat, empty. There was no snowman. There were no remnants of a snowman. A cold feeling, colder than the wind, washed over him. Henderson had lied. Why would he lie about a snowman? Jack turned back to the house. He needed to call the station. He needed backup. He needed a search party. He burst through the front door. Rocky, I need you to stay? Jack stopped. Rocky wasn't in the hallway. The door to the laundry room, where Jack usually kept the dog food, was scratched open. And then he heard it. A scratching sound at the back door. Jack ran to the kitchen. Rocky was throwing his body against the sliding glass door. He was frantic. He was whining, a high-pitched sound of pure distress. Rocky, stop. You're going to rip your stitches. Jack grabbed the dog, but Rocky spun around. He didn't bite, but he nudged Jack's hand away with his nose. He ran back to the glass door and barked. Once, sharp, demanding. He looked at Jack, then looked out into the black backyard toward the woods. You smell her? Jack asked, his voice trembling. Do you smell Victoria? Rocky barked again. He spun in a circle, then ran back to the door, hitting the glass with his paw. Jack looked at the bandage. The red stain was bigger now. It was the size of a saucer. You can't go out there, Rocky. You'll bleed out. You'll die. Rocky didn't care. He looked at Jack with an intensity that scared him. It was a look that said, open this door or I will go through it. Jack made a choice. It was a terrible choice, a choice that might kill his partner, but he had no other options. The snow was burying everything. If Victoria was out there, she would freeze to death in an hour. Okay, Jack whispered. Okay. He unlocked the sliding door. The wind grabbed it and ripped it open. Rocky didn't hesitate. He didn't wait for a command. He bolted. He launched himself into the deep snow, stumbling as his front legs hit a drift, but scrambling back up. Wait. Rocky, wait. Jack zipped up his coat, grabbed his heavy tactical flashlight, and ran after him. The snow in the backyard was knee-deep. Jack struggled to lift his legs, panting heavily, but Rocky was plowing through it like a wolf. The dog wasn't running smoothly, though. He was limping. His head hung low, favoring the side of his neck that was cut. Every step looked like a struggle. They reached the tree line. The woods were dark, a wall of shadows. Rocky, slow down. The dog stopped. He waited for Jack to catch up, his sides heaving. As Jack got closer, he shined the light on the dog. Fresh blood was dripping from a bandage. It fell onto the snow in perfect round drops. "Oh, buddy," Jack cried. "We have to stop. You're hurt too bad." Rocky turned his head. He looked into the woods, ears swiveling. He wasn't sniffing the ground anymore. The wind was too strong. It would have scattered any scent trails minutes ago. Rocky was listening. He was listening for something Jack couldn't hear. The dog let out a soft sound and started moving again, deeper into the trees. Jack followed. He had no choice. He stumbled over roots hidden under the snow. Branches whipped his face, scratching his skin. His toes were already starting to go numb. They walked for 20 minutes, then 30. "Victoria!" Jack yelled every few minutes. "Victoria, yell if you can hear me." Nothing but the wind. Jack's hope was fading. They were in the middle of nowhere. Why would Victoria be out here? It didn't make sense. "Rocky, are you sure?" Jack grabbed a tree to steady himself. "Maybe we're going the wrong way. Maybe she's at a friend's house." Rocky didn't stop. He was moving slower now. He was dragging his back paws a little. The loss of blood was getting to him. He stumbled, falling onto his chest in the snow. "That's it," Jack said, rushing forward. "That's it. We're going back. I'm carrying you." Jack bent down to scoop the 80-pound dog into his arms. But Rocky snarled. It was a warning. "Do not touch me." Rocky forced himself up. His legs were shaking violently. He looked at Jack, and for a second his eyes rolled back slightly. He was dizzy. He was fading. But then he turned his head into the wind again. He took a step. He was heading toward the sound of rushing water. The river. "Rocky, no," Jack breathed. "Not the river." The Blackwood River was notorious. In the summer, it was a beautiful, rushing river. In the winter, it was a death trap. The current was fast, which meant the ice was never as thick as it looked. It was shifting, unstable. Rocky reached the edge of the tree line. The river lay before them, a wide, open scar in the landscape. The wind out here was ferocious. There were no trees to block it. It hit them with the force of a hammer. Rocky stumbled down the bank, sliding on the frozen mud. "Rocky, get back here," Jack commanded. "That's an order." The dog reached the edge of the ice. He stopped. He looked back at Jack. The bandage was completely red now. It was soaked. Rocky stepped onto the ice. The ice groaned. It was a low, terrifying sound, like the river was complaining about the weight pressing down on it. "Rocky," Jack screamed. "Heel. Get off the ice." Jack stood on the muddy bank, his heart hammering so hard it felt like it was going to crack his ribs. He couldn't go out there. He was a big man, over 200 pounds with all his gear. If he stepped on that ice, he would go through in a second. But Rocky kept going. The dog was moving strangely. He wasn't walking like he was tracking a criminal. He was crawling. He had lowered his belly to the ice to spread his weight out. He pulled himself forward with his claws, leaving a smear of blood on the white frost. He was about 15 feet from the shore now. "Please, buddy," Jack wept, the tears freezing instantly on his eyelashes. "Please come back. I can't save you out there." Rocky stopped. He was in the middle of a dark patch of ice. The snow had been blown clear here, leaving just a raw, black frozen surface. Rocky laid his head down on the ice. He closed his eyes. For a second, Jack thought the dog had died. He thought the blood loss had finally claimed him, and his best friend had gone out onto the ice to die alone. No. Jack felt at his knees on the bank. But then Rocky opened his eyes. He opened his mouth and let out a sound that Jack had never heard before. It wasn't a bark. It wasn't a growl. It was a howl. A long, mourning, broken howl that cut through the noise of the blizzard. It sounded like a plea. It sounded like a prayer. Rocky lifted his paw and scratched the ice. He looked back at Jack. The look in his eyes was pleading. "Come here. Look. Look what I found." Jack wiped his eyes. He squinted into the darkness. Why was the dog scratching the ice? And then a thought hit Jack. A thought so terrible it nearly made him vomit. Beavers. Sometimes beavers swam under the ice. Dogs could hear them. Is it an animal, Rocky? Leave it. Leave it. Rocky barked at him, angry, frustrated. He scratched the ice again, harder this time. He wasn't hunting. Jack stood up. He took a step onto the ice. It cracked loudly. He froze. I can't reach you, Jack whispered. Rocky seemed to understand. The dog shifted his weight. He moved his head to the side, looking down into the ice like it was a window. Jack took his heavy, tactical flashlight. It was a metal mag light, heavy as a baton. He clicked it to the highest setting. The beam cut through the snow and darkness like a lightsaber. Show him, Rocky, Jack said. He aimed the light right at his dog. The beam hit the ice around Rocky's paws. The ice was translucent black. The light penetrated it, illuminating the water flowing underneath. And there it was. At first, Jack's brain refused to accept it. He saw a shape, a blob of color, pink, bright neon pink. It was the color of the winter coat he had bought Victoria 2 weeks ago at the mall. She had picked it out because it had a fuzzy hood. Jack stopped breathing. The world stopped spinning. Under the ice, trapped in the freezing current, was his daughter. She was pressed up against the underside of the ice sheet. The current was pushing her against it. She wasn't moving. Her eyes were closed. Her hair was floating around her face like a halo in the dark water. And one of her hands, her small, pale hand, was pressed palm flat against the ice, right where Rocky was resting his nose. Victoria! The scream ripped out of Jack's throat. It was a primal sound, a sound of pure horror. He didn't care about the ice anymore. He didn't care about the cold. He didn't care about dying. Jack ran. He sprinted off the bank and onto the frozen river. Spiderwebs of white fractures shot out from his boots with every step. The river roared beneath him. He threw himself down next to Rocky, sliding on his knees. He smashed his face against the ice. Victoria, Victoria, can you hear me? She looked peaceful, too peaceful. She was blue. Her lips were the color of a bruise. She wasn't struggling. She was drowning. Or she had already drowned. Moo, Rocky. Jack shoved the dog aside. Rocky yelped in pain as he rolled over his injured neck. But he didn't leave. He scrambled back up, barking at the ice. Jack raised his heavy flashlight. He held it like a hammer. Hold on, baby. Daddy's here. He smashed the metal flashlight down onto the ice with everything he had. Chips of ice flew into his face. The surface didn't break. It was thick here. Too thick. Come on. Jack screamed. A crack appeared. The crack deepened. Water started to seep up. The ice gave way. It didn't shatter into small pieces. A huge slab simply collapsed under the force. The black water surged up like a geyser, hitting Jack in the face. It was so cold it felt like acid. It took the breath right out of his lungs. I'm coming. Jack plunged his hands into the hole, but the current was faster than he expected. As soon as the ice broke, the pressure changed. The water rushed to fill the gap. Victoria's body was sucked backward, away from the hole. No, Jack lunged, dipping his head and shoulders into the water. He groped blindly in the darkness. His fingers brushed her coat. He felt the fabric. I got her. But his gloves were slippery. She slid out of his grip. She was drifting deeper, under the solid ice, where he couldn't reach her. I lost her. I lost her. Jack pulled his head out, gasping, choking on water and panic. He looked around wildly. He was going to have to jump in. He would have to go under the ice. It was suicide. He would never find the hole again. They would both die. But he started to slide his legs into the hole. Then a blur of motion. Rock. The wounded dog didn't look at Jack. He didn't hesitate. He saw the girl drifting away. Rocky launched himself. He dove headfirst into the freezing slush. He didn't just dip his head. He threw his entire body into the river. Rocky, the dog, disappeared under the black water. The hole was churning. Bubbles rose to the surface. 1 second, 2 seconds, 3 seconds. Jack stared at the black water, paralyzed. Please, God, please, Suddenly, the water erupted. Rocky's head broke the surface. He was thrashing. He was fighting, and his jaws were clamped tight. He had her. Rocky had bitten down hard on the thick hood of Victoria's pink coat. He was paddling furiously with his front paws, his back legs kicking at the deep water. His eyes were wide with effort. A low, gurgling growl came from his throat as he fought the current. He dragged her toward the edge of the broken ice. Jack lunged forward. He grabbed the back of Victoria's coat with both hands. I have her. Let go, Rocky. Drop it. Rocky didn't let go. He kept pulling until Jack had a firm grip on her arm. Only then did the dog release the coat. Rocky scrambled, his claws scratching desperately on the slick edge of the ice, trying to pull himself out. But he was weak. The cold was shutting his muscles down. He slipped back. No, you don't, Jack yelled. With one hand holding Victoria's lifeless body on the ice, Jack reached out with his other hand and grabbed the handle of Rocky's tactical vest. With a roar of effort, Jack heaved. He pulled his daughter and his dog out of the grave and onto the solid ice. They lay there in a pile. The wind howled over them. Victoria wasn't breathing. Jack scrambled to his knees. He ripped the hood off her head. Her face was gray. Victoria breathed. Please, baby. He tilted her head back. He pinched her nose. He covered her small blue mouth with his and blew. He watched her chest. Nothing. Come on. He started compressions. He pressed down on her small chest. Nothing. Rocky was lying in the snow next to him. The bandage was gone, washed away by the river. The wound on his neck was open and raw, washing pink water onto the ice. The dog was shaking violently, his teeth chattering. But he didn't lay down to die. He crawled. He dragged his freezing, wet body over to Victoria. He laid his heavy body right on top of her legs. He pushed his wet nose against her cheek and licked her. He was trying to warm her. He was trying to wake her up. Don't give up, Rocky, Jack sobbed, pumping Victoria's chest. Don't you dare give up on me. Come on, Victoria. And then a twitch. Victoria's chest jerked. She let out a horrible, wet sound. Then she vomited water onto the ice. That's it. Get it out. Jack rolled her onto her side. She coughed. She gasped. She screamed. It was a weak, raspy scream, but it was alive. Daddy, she choked out. I'm here. I'm right here. Jack pulled her into his lap, wrapping his giant coat around both of her and the shivering dog. It was cold, she whispered, her teeth chattering. Mr. Henderson, he chased me. Jack froze. His blood turned to ice, colder than the river. Henderson. He said he had puppies in his truck, Victoria stammered, shivering uncontrollably. I ran. He chased me. He was so fast. I ran to the river. He couldn't follow me too. Heavy. Rage, pure, white-hot rage, filled Jack. Henderson hadn't been looking for her. He had been hunting her. He had lied about the snowman to cover his tracks. He won't hurt you ever again, Jack said, his voice hard as steel. I promise. Jack picked Victoria up in his arms. He looked at Rocky. Can you walk, buddy? Rocky tried to stand. His legs gave out. He collapsed. He was done. He had nothing left. Jack looked at the long trek back to the house. He couldn't carry both of them. But then lights, blue and red lights flashing through the trees. Sirens wailing. The backup. Over here. Jack screamed. Officer down. I need a medic. Paramedics and officers swarmed onto the ice in a blur of noise and hands. Someone wrapped a thermal blanket around Jack, while someone else took Victoria, gently putting her on a stretcher. Jack refused to let go of her hand until he saw them working on her. But then he turned back to the ice because his heart was split in two. Two officers were looking down at Rocky, who hadn't moved an inch. Is he? One officer started to ask, his voice hesitant. He's alive, Jack shouted, shoving past them to fall to his knees beside his partner. Rocky's eyes were closed now, and he was terrifyingly cold to the touch. I need a medic over here. Now, Jack yelled, his voice cracking with desperation. A paramedic ran over, looking at the dog and then back at the girl. "Sir, we need to focus on the girl. My daughter is stable," Jack roared, the sound echoing off the frozen river. "This dog saved her life. You save him." The paramedic didn't argue with the wild look in Jack's eyes and knelt down, checking Rocky's gums, which were pale white. "He's in shock, massive blood loss, and hypothermia. So we need to get him to the vet immediately." Jack picked the dog up, and even though Rocky weighed 80 pounds and Jack was exhausted, he lifted the animal like he weighed nothing at all. He carried him off the ice, stumbling up the bank toward the ambulances, and he didn't put Rocky in a cage. He climbed into the back of the ambulance with Victoria, laying the wet, bleeding dog on the floor right next to the stretcher. "Drive," Jack ordered, slamming the doors shut. "Just drive." The ride to the hospital was a nightmare of beeping machines and rattling metal. Victoria was warming up, her color coming back, but Rocky was fading fast. Jack sat on the floor of the ambulance, one hand holding his daughter's hand and the other pressed against the side of the dog's neck, feeling for a pulse that was faint and thready. "Stay with me, buddy," Jack whispered, tears dripping onto the dog's wet fur. "You don't get to die, not today." Victoria looked down from the stretcher with wide, fearful eyes. "Is he going to go to heaven, Daddy?" she asked, her voice small. Jack looked at his daughter, then at the dog who had taken a knife for him and jumped into a frozen river for her. "No," Jack said firmly. "He's staying right here with us." When they arrived at the hospital, it was chaos as doctors took Victoria to the ER, and a vet team from the emergency clinic met them at the bay for Rocky because Jack had radioed ahead and threatened to tear the city apart if they weren't there. They took the dog away on a gurney, rushing him down a different hallway, leaving Jack standing in the middle of the bright white hospital corridor, dripping wet, shivering, and completely alone. A nurse tried to get him to sit down to get checked out, but he shook his head and walked to the waiting room to sit in a plastic chair, staring at the wall. He didn't know how much time passed. It could have been minutes, or it could have been hours. But finally, the chief of police walked in looking serious. "Jack," the chief said, sitting down next to him, "Victoria is asking for you, and she's going to be fine, just some mild hypothermia and shock." Jack let out a breath he felt like he had been holding for a year. "And Henderson?" Jack asked, his hands clenching into fists. The chief's face hardened. "We found him packing his truck trying to skip town, and we found zip ties and duct tape in his garage. He's in a cell, Jack, and he's not getting out because the DA is throwing everything at him. Kidnapping, attempted murder, he's done." Jack nodded, knowing it wasn't enough, but it was a start. "And the dog?" Jack asked, terrified of the answer. "Is Ruck?" The chief smiled, a small, tired smile. "The vet just called. He needed 3 pints of blood and about 50 stitches, and they had to warm him up slowly. But he's awake, and he's growling at the nurses because they won't let him stand up." Jack stood up, his legs feeling weak, but his heart feeling lighter than air. He walked down the hall to Victoria's room, where she was sitting up in bed, wrapped in warm blankets and drinking hot chocolate. When she saw him, she put the cup down and opened her arms, and Jack hugged her, burying his face in her hair, smelling the river water and the hospital soap. "I love you, Pumpkin," he whispered. "I love you too, Daddy," she said, then looked past him. "Can we see him?" she asked. Jack smiled. "Yeah, let's go see him." A nurse brought a wheelchair for Victoria, and Jack pushed her down the hall to the special recovery room they had set up. Inside, in a large kennel with the door open, lay Rocky looking like a warrior, shaved in patches, stitched up, and hooked up to enfor drip. But when he saw Victoria, his ears perked up and he tried to lift his head, letting out a soft whine. Victoria reached out and touched his nose, and Rocky closed his eyes and leaned into her hand, letting out a deep sigh of contentment. He wasn't just a dog. He was the reason they were a family. Jack watched them, the 2 loves of his life, safe and together while the storm still raged outside, beating against the hospital windows. But in that room, it was warm. Jack put his hand on Rocky's head and scratched him behind the ears. "Good boy," Jack whispered. "Best boy." And as Rocky fell asleep, his paw resting on Victoria's blanket, Jack knew that no matter how cold the world got, They would always be okay because they had the guardian who refused to leave the ice. Thank you so much for staying with me until the very end of this story. If you enjoyed this story, I promise you will surely love the next one. It's as crazier and more thrilling as you can ever imagine. So do check it out. Click on the image showing on your screen right now to watch the next one.